Yes.
I found the speed at which the incidents occurred in your music rather breathtaking. Is it possible that, do you regard the traditional way that we listen to music, or the music that we're brought up on, as it were, as actual barrier to the appreciation of your spatial polyphony, as it were? And if so, what are the implications as far as education of the public go?
Well, I have 6 children, and they pick it up as the most natural thing in the world when they go with me to a rehearsal, or when they hear talk about it. Some like certain works better, or not so well. It must start in early childhood. I mean, there's no other way. I had a teacher in information theory, Meyer Epler, the famous Meyer Epler. He said, beware Stockhausen, it takes at least 35 years until anything comes through. Even with the horses, certain nerves become thicker when you always give them the same signal, he said, physiologically speaking. He said, do you think with human beings it can go much faster? Just wait for another generation. I mean, certain people are just out already with 18 years. Finished. They are old like others with 90, and there are very few, naturally, who are with 80 like very young people. It's just the question how much everybody trains himself in renewing constantly his ability to perceive, and, well, it needs a lot of spiritual training to remain young. I think everybody has certainly heard about the book The Future Shock of Alvin Toffler. The basic problem of the next 20, 30, or not only that, but let's say of the whole time of Aquarius in particular, will be that most of the people can't keep track with the speed of change. They just get a shock, and then that's out. All they need is, in a skyscraper, a meditation center, where they just sit longer and longer every day in order to be fit for the work. But most of the people won't keep, no, how do you say it, won't go with the speed of evolution. And that's basically a question of our extrasensitory and sensitory system.
This has probably been touched on slightly before, but I'd like to just dwell on just a bit, and that is the question of the dehumanization in contemporary music that some people have been talking about.
Yeah.
And I mean it specifically of electronic music.
Yes.
And the two criticisms that have been made are both that the medium itself is dehumanized, like
Yes.
the sine wave and
Yes.
the others are very bare, sterile. They don't have the human eccentricities around them that we hear in a concert hall. The second criticism is perhaps a little more fundamental, and that has to do with the actual content. Although you don't divorce it from the form, you call it the form. I mean, there is some sort of content, and presumably this is a reflection of some sort of social phenomenon. And the question is, in effect, if this phenomenon is so dehumanized itself, maybe the art is going to die fairly quickly. I mean, if the art doesn't have the potential of touching basic human concerns such as love, hate, these kinds of things, can it live? Is it really valid art?
Well, there are two possible answers to what you have said. The first one is, it is certainly a mistake to consider all human beings equal. Between, as Albert Schweitzer says, the ape and the saint, there is a whole scale. And they all look like human beings, more or less. There are other people who say that from about 23 years onwards, everybody is responsible for his face, for the way he looks like. What we mean by this is that there are certainly very few people who constantly work on their degree of illumination and on the expansion of their consciousness. And we are in a state as human beings of multiplying with an enormous speed. And I doubt if the most illuminated people will multiply with the highest speed. which means that in a very necessary and healthy way, subconsciousness is exploding. And I say subconsciousness, not supraconsciousness. The second answer to your question is a little bit more esoteric. If you have ever heard the name Sri Aurobindo, then you might know that there is an Indian sage who died in 1950, who has foreseen several thousand years of human evolution, or involution, as he says. And basically, he says that we are in a situation nowadays which is comparable to the situation when, like in 2001, that's not what he says, I add this in brackets, when the first so-called human being came out of the kingdom of beings that were not called, or that the scientists or the human beings do not call human beings. Well, we say animals. There is nowadays even controversial talk about the fact if not the human beings have been a special breed from the beginning on. Nevertheless, there's that moment in 2001 where the ape takes a bone and kills the other one with a bone. The flesh of intelligence rises him above the others, though he is physically weaker. Aurobindo says that we are at the threshold of a new terrestrial mutation, where a few beings, very few beings for the time being, are changing into something else, into a kind of supra-human being. And what you call the dehumanizing actually is the fear of the majority of us that they might not make it. And they call this dehumanize. What they really mean, without being able to verbally formulate it that way, is not the dehumanizing, but the superhumanizing or the suprahumanizing. That jump, that enormous jump, like from, let's say, from the animal to man, from the man to a superhuman spiritual being. And this is certainly, what concerns my personal experience, true. There are already beings among the human beings who are in every sense far beyond the rest. And this is clear from the way, not only the way they live and behave, but from what they can do, what they really can do. And certainly the arts reflect this whole process as well. And this naturally is a moment of extreme crisis, which is that fruitful moment that comes very rare in the world ages, where everything switches on a new level. Not, excuse me, where, yeah, the consciousness switches on a new level, but not in large numbers. We might ask Aurobindo why not all the animals have become human beings. We can say nowadays they almost have. I mean, the chicken farms are still retarding this process a little bit, but what you eat there is certainly more cardboard than animals. What I mean by this, we have almost eaten up the crust of plants and animals of this world and transformed it into human bones and flesh. And this process will certainly continue with an enormous asymptotic speed until the middle of next century, or a little longer, until we are 15 billion. And then the food certainly will be scratched on the bottom of the sea, or produced completely artificially with chemicals. It's a little importance, actually, what we eat. What I mean is that everything is transformed ultimately into human beings, yes. Then there are no animals anymore in a few zoos, and in a few photographs we still can see them, but the principle has been to transform it into human beings. And then the next step is naturally, what are the human beings becoming? At least now we can say only very few will make it, and the general fear and crisis reflects simply that process. Most of the beings feel they have that inner clock which tells them where the evolution is going, but they can't make it in this life. So that creates antagonism and wars and fights and discussions and God knows what. Exterminations, fascist systems, all sorts of things. It's a sign of rebirth of humanity.